On today's episode of the Hustle Today podcast, I have Kendra Swalls. Kendra is a former educator turned photographer and then used that experience to become a photographer educator. Awesome story. Make sure to tune in, check it out. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Hustle Today podcast. My name is Trent, and I am very honored to have Kendra Swalls here today. Kendra, I could try and intro you, but you could do it better than I can. So why don't you jump in and kind of tell us a little bit about yourself?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here and chat with you today. My name is Kendra Swalls. I live in the Dallas area, and I am a full-time wedding and portrait photographer. I also have an education site where I help other business owners get their business started and off the ground, along with a podcast I've recently started. So just kind of doing all the things. I'm a mom to two girls, a former full-time teacher turned entrepreneur, just trying to balance it all. Some days doing better than other days.
I think that's all of us. We're all having our good days, and we're all having our test days, as I like to call them. Well, you've got a great resume already of things that you're doing, and I love that. I love the people that bring the family aspect into it too, because it is a big part of our lives. Being a dad of three, I know family's a big part of our business, even when they're not there working on the business with you. But I want to kind of jump into it and ask you who's been most influential on you in your life, whether personal or business.
Yeah, so that would definitely be my mom. Looking back, it's interesting how you view your parents differently the older you get.
Absolutely.
And I didn't realize how big of an influence my mom was on my life until I started my own business. And looking back, growing up, she actually ran a family business that we had. And I wouldn't have thought of her as an entrepreneur in a traditional sense of she started her own business, but it was she ran the business that my great-grandfather had started. And she worked long hours and she put everything she had into her business. And when she wasn't doing that, she was putting everything she had into our family. And of course, there were times when I would get frustrated that she wasn't at, my school field trip or my basketball game or whatever. But looking back, I see now, being a mom of my own, like what she was having to sacrifice to give us the life that we had. And the older I get, and we're very close now. I'm an only child, so that's just me. But she and I are very close now, and she's my number one supporter. She's 100%. She was the one pushing me to follow my dreams. And, when it was scary, the idea of giving up a really great full-time job to live this kind of different version of a life where you live by your own rules and you set your own calendar and you run your own business. And a lot of people were doubting it and questioning it. She was the one right there saying, no, if this is what you really want to do, then you need to go for it. You need to try it. And if it doesn't work out, you have something to fall back on. But she's always been there supporting me. And she's kind of my example of what it's like to be a working mom and trying to do it really well. And even though there were times when I felt like she wasn't doing the best job, because kids always have a skewed perspective, looking back now, I'm like, no, she did an amazing job of raising me and providing for our family and building a business that was super successful. So she definitely has been a huge influence on my life.
Very cool. Yeah, I agree with you. I've grew up with a mom who's very entrepreneurial, and at the time it's like, hey, what's going on? You're always here or there or whatnot. And looking back, you definitely have a different perspective and more respect for what they were doing. And so I appreciate that you understand that now too, like myself. One thing though that you mentioned that kind of stood out to me is you talked about how scary it was to make that transition from a full-time job, a regular 9 to 5. I guess an educator isn't a good way to say a 9 to 5, because knowing some of my kids' teachers, they're there for a lot longer than that. Obviously you get that break there, right. In the middle, but tell us a little bit about that transition that you made going from the traditional job to a full-time, taking your side hustle to a full-time job.
Yeah. So we were chatting a little bit before about kind of my background, but growing up, I always thought teaching was my path. I loved school. I loved being a student. I loved the idea of being a teacher. When I went into college, like there was no question in my mind, like teaching was the direction I wanted to go. And once I got into the classroom, and after the first several years of really loving it, and really with anything, it kind of the newness wears off, the shininess wears off. But after several years, I thought, okay, I want to do something different. I need a change of pace. And again, not really knowing any other path, I was like, well, I guess I'm going to continue in education, but maybe go into administration or, counseling or something like that. So I went back and got my master's degree in curriculum, wanted to be a math coordinator for a district and write curriculum and do all these things. Ended up getting that job. It's kind of interesting how when you reach for something and when you finally achieve it, you're like, oh, it's not quite as exciting as I thought it would be. But I had this really great job. When it comes to education, anything that's not necessarily in the classroom is considered, I don't want to say a cushy job because none of it's cushy, but right. I had a really great schedule. I could set my own schedule. I was able to work with teachers. I worked with students a little bit too, but I had this flexibility. I had, summers off and weekends off, and I could leave at 4 or 5 o'clock and kind of leave it all at school and come home and be mom and be wife and be with family. And so, and of course the pay was decent. I mean, you're a teacher, you're not getting a ton of money, but it was a steady income.
Yeah.
But I just had this nagging feeling inside of me that there was something else that I was supposed to be doing, that there was something I was not tapping into. Mm-hmm. And so, my husband kind of pushed me to try some hobbies. He bought me a digital camera that got me into photography. I taught myself how to use it, started taking pictures of anybody and mostly my dog at the time because I didn't have kids, and my dog was old and she would just kind of lay there. So I would take pictures of my dog. And then I started taking pictures of families and friends, and they wanted to hire me, started my photography business. And the more it grew and the more passionate I became about that, I found myself spending less time at, laying in bed at night thinking about lesson plans or thinking about the next conference I could present at. I started thinking more about what's the next photo shoot I can do? What's the next way I can get new clients? What's the next marketing plan I can come up with? And when I realized that that was taking over the majority of my headspace, I was like, okay, something is shifting, something's changing. Then you add in the fact that we had our first daughter, and I never thought I would ever want to be one of those, stay-at-home moms or a work-from-home mom. I was like, no, I need to be out around people, and kids are great, but that's what daycares are for. And then that kid comes along and everything changes, and you eat all the things you said in the past, Yeah. And I was like, I really want to do this and be home, and being a mom is so important, and being able to kind of control my own schedule became a huge thing for me. I was like, I don't want somebody else telling me you have to be here from this time to this time, and I control what you do during those hours. I wanted to set my own schedule. So I decided when our second daughter was born back in 2016, I was like, okay, I'm giving myself this next year to get things in order. And by the time she's 1, I want to be able to have that freedom and flexibility. And I worked my rear end off. I stepped outside of my comfort zone. I did things that I had been not doing in the past because I had that safety net of my full-time job. And by the time she actually right around her first birthday, I put in my notice. And kind of for me, fortunately, my principal was amazing. And she was like, if you ever need to come back, you have a job, you just call me wherever I am. I will find something for you. So I kind of had that backup plan a little bit. Yeah. But I made that leap, and I didn't go the traditional way of, have 6 months in savings or a year in savings. I just kind of, in fact, I didn't even tell my husband I'd officially resigned until about 2 weeks later.
Wow.
We'd had the conversations. He knew it was coming, but I was like, I was a little bit nervous to finally say I did it. So I was like, by the way, I gave my notice 2 weeks ago. And he was great. He was super supportive. But yeah, I just sort of jumped. I knew I needed to rip out that safety net. And if I didn't do that, I think I was always just going to play it safe. I needed to be able to just do the things that were scary to make it work. And it's worked. It's been great ever since.
That's great. Yeah. You got to burn that bridge at some point because, you'll always be holding on to it if you don't.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. But I think what you're doing is great. And obviously you've experienced some success with it and things are going well enough that you're staying the course, but I've got to ask, how do you balance it? How do you balance life? How do you balance being a mom, a wife, and building a business? And not only building the business, now you've branched out into helping people build their businesses.
Yeah. I don't always know the answer to this question. And it's funny you asked me this today because just yesterday I had a little bit of a meltdown where I was, I've been spending a lot more time on family right now. And, I had kids' school activities, and just this last week we took a day just for a family day. My husband took off from work and we went and did activities as a family. And at the same time, I was like, oh, but I've got so much work I'm missing out on. And it's that whole, I feel guilty when I'm with my family because I'm leaving clients kind of in the lurch, waiting for emails or waiting for galleries or waiting for whatever from me. And then when I'm working, I feel guilty for not being with my kids or with my husband or whoever needs my attention. And so someone said this to me just recently and it really kind of resonated. They said, it's not about everything being 50-50. They said, some days you're going to have in your life, you're going to have faster horses and slower horses. And so at some point your faster horses are going to take the lead in the race. But that doesn't mean the slower horses are out of the race. They're just back a little bit. And so I have kind of given myself some grace and I've said, okay, it's okay for me to spend today just focusing on family. And if I only get half my emails answered, then I only get half my emails answered. And then tomorrow, if I spend more time with my, on my laptop or in the studio or whatever, and I don't see my kids as much, or I need one night away, it's okay because the next day I'll be there for them. And I've had this conversation with my husband a lot about, the fact that because I do still have one little one at home with me, she's in like a little 2-day preschool program for a couple hours, but in the big scheme of things, like 10 hours a week when she's in preschool is not enough to run a full-time business. And so I've just told him, like, there are going to be some days when you come home that I need to go out the door and either go to a coffee shop or find some place where I can go have a couple hours of uninterrupted work time. And so I've started kind of doing that a little bit more, but it's an every day. Like every morning I kind of wake up and I go, okay, which direction is it going to go today? Am I going to be more business minded? Am I going to be more family minded? Some days it is kind of a 50-50 split, but it's just an everyday, it's kind of like any other relationship. You have to work on it every single day. And the balance of life and business, it's the same thing. You have to put in the effort every day to say, okay, I can either go 100% one way, or I can kind of do like a 30-70 split. It just depends, what is needed of me each day. So
absolutely. So going back a little bit, one thing that you also said that was part of my entrepreneurship journey is you said that you wanted to be able to craft your schedule and, be able to have that ability to where you can have a family day, where you can have a day where you just focus on work. And that's really where I want to be too. I know I need to put in the hours, but my wife and I have decided between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. are in crucial hours because that's when all the activities are for the kids. The kids go to bed around 8 o'clock. And so it's like, that is quality focused family time. And then, outside of that, there's a lot of craziness that happens, but I like the ability as an entrepreneur to be able to craft that schedule. So we're definitely in alignment there.
Yeah, that's the thing that drove me the most. And I've recently, kind of learned about the Enneagram. I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram assessment that kind of gives everybody it's sort of like a personality test, but I feel like it goes a little bit deeper. And through taking that, in fact, I interviewed somebody on my podcast that was an Enneagram expert, and she kind of walked through each of the different personality types. And when she talked about mine, one of the key factors was that we don't like to be confined to something that's not in our control. And I was like, that describes me so perfectly. Like throughout my entire life, I can look back and see where I was like, okay, that's why I felt restless there, because I was not in control of my own time or my own schedule or my own path or whatever it might be. And I think that that's a big thing a lot of entrepreneurs feel, is they want to have that power to make those decisions for themselves, not have somebody else making that decision for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Control's not necessarily a word I like to use for that, but it is basically what it boils down to, is you want to be able to control certain aspects of things, and it's ultimately boiling down to, you want to create an impact or a difference or whatnot, but at the same time, you want to be able to do it your way without someone else telling you to do that. And I've talked with some other entrepreneurs that, there are some organizations where you can create an impact, you can make a difference, but most often entrepreneurship is the best path to do that.
Yep, absolutely.
And you're now creating an impact through not only your business but also your podcast. You've been going through this photography journey and learning that and becoming an expert at it, and now you're teaching others in your area how to be an expert as well. Tell us a little bit about that transition from being the photographer to teaching the photographer in a way.
Yeah, so it oddly just kind of naturally happened. When I started my photography business, I didn't really know any other photographers in my area. I mean, I knew a handful of kind of the big name people, and I found that sometimes when I would reach out to them, I would either not hear back, or the responses I got were not necessarily the most friendly and welcoming. And I was like, there's got to be something else out there that's a community. And I had seen these larger, kind of national communities on Facebook and message boards and forums and things like that. And I was like, I want something local. I want somebody that I can go have coffee with, because my poor husband, he was just tired of hearing about camera lenses and f-stops and all that kind of stuff. He was like, I don't know what that is, but sure, I'll listen. And I was like, I need somebody that gets it. So I started my own photography group here in the DFW area, and just for women photographers. And originally I was like, if I get 15, 20 people that join and we can all get together and, and have coffee and talk, or go have a girls' night or something, that'd be great. And it sort of naturally I started that 7 years ago, I believe. And over the last 7 years, it just kind of has grown into its own sort of thing. And we do these big events every year. We have a Christmas party every year, and we have meetups throughout the year, because, the Dallas area is huge. And so we have little pockets of people that have kind of formed their own little connections and groups. And so through that, I had this natural platform to share my expertise and my advice, because I would notice that as the group grew, I was becoming the one who I started it. I was sort of the one leading it, but I also had more knowledge than a lot of the women who were joining, who were just in that beginning phase. And so I started sharing little tidbits inside that Facebook group. And then I would have women reaching out to me saying, well, I would love to, mentor with you, or I'd love to meet up with you. I started hosting kind of little mini workshops here in the Dallas area. And from that, it just kind of led to other people saying, hey, if you want to know about how to start a business, this is the person to go to, go talk to Kendra. And so and I think too, the fact that I was a natural teacher, I had my teaching background. I was used to this. I knew how to simplify things. I taught second graders, so I knew how to take things that were difficult and abstract and put them into kind of second grade terms and language and understanding. And so I was able to naturally, where other people, it was difficult for them to understand certain things, it was easier for me to kind of explain it and map it out for them. And I had a lot of people over the years kind of saying, oh, you should turn this into a course or an online program or this or that. And I was blogging all the time. And while I love the idea of blogging, I don't write very well. I'm not a great writer. That's not my talent. And I was outsourcing it for a while. I was having other people write for me, and it just wasn't working out. And once I learned about podcasts, I was like, oh, well, I could talk. I love to talk. Yeah. So this seems natural. I can do this. And I had the idea for a long time, and it's one of those things kind of set in the back of my mind. And then this year I was like, no, this is the year I'm going to do it. I'm just going to jump in. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to jump in and do it. And I started my podcast. It's called Girl Means Business. And I started off with just a handful of episodes about, my story and a couple little marketing things, and it's taken off and I love it. And it's been the perfect balance of being able to help people globally, broadly, and not just here locally in the Dallas area. But then it's also led to people locally being able to find me and say, hey, I want to work more closely with you one-on-one. So it's just kind of, again, that natural sort of transition from the classroom. And I remember thinking whenever I quit teaching, I was like, man, I feel like I'm closing a door on something that I really love. I mean, I enjoyed helping others. And I was like, I hate to sort of hang up that side of me. And I hated to walk away from that. And so now I'm able to combine those two together. And it just feels like this sort of perfect harmony of the passion I found in teaching and the passion I found in photography and business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you're not the first educator that I've interviewed. And it's interesting that it is such a natural progression for an educator to be a business owner. It's really, using a lot of the same principles, like you said, simplifying things. It's not something you typically think of as being a natural transition, but I'm finding out it really is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like I always tell people when they come in for mentoring sessions, they're like, well, but I really love what I do in my job, or they're like, but I feel guilty because I've spent all this time and money on education when with college or post-college degrees, things like that. Cause that was big for me. I was like, I have a bachelor's and a master's degree. I've spent a lot of money on my degrees and I'm not going to use them. But it's like, you never know when those skills you acquired are going to benefit you as an entrepreneur, because you have to, in the beginning, do everything. You have to know how to do so many different things when you're running a business, that those little skills you've learned are going to creep in somewhere, somehow.
Absolutely, they will. So, this podcast, though, it sounds like it's a pretty easy transition, or not transition is the wrong word I'm looking for, but pretty easy business card, more or less, for local people who want to work with you, or even abroad. You can jump on a Zoom call and help them out. I mean, the podcast thing for me, honestly, wasn't something I set out to do initially. It was, the Hustle Energy brand started out as a product, and through a year and a half of banging my head against a wall trying to get a product out, it's like, all right, while I'm working on this, why don't I talk to other entrepreneurs and, find out, what makes them tick and what, some of their struggles are, and be able to share it with other people. And it's been an awesome experience. I've been able to connect with a lot of great people, and I love the podcasting platform now. So it's something I'll definitely continue, even though it wasn't, in the plans initially. So I'm glad you've got your voice out there and you're sharing it with people. And really it's fantastic that you're just sharing that information out there, because a lot of people resonate with that. They all have excuses, and you're just kind of throwing it out there, helping them out. And then they're like, okay, she knows this much. Well, she must know a lot more. I've got to hire her,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely sort of a, the tip of the iceberg sort of thing. Like, hey, I'm going to give you all the stuff that I can give you. And then if you want to go deeper and you want to go more one-on-one, let's do it together. So it's been really fun. And the same thing you said, like I've met some really amazing people through the interviews I've done. And, when I first started it, I was like, oh, this will be a fun, kind of way for me to get my content out there in a different way than just typing it out. But and again, honestly, I wanted to help other people, because ultimately that's one of my favorite things to do, is to help women find their passion in their business or be able to provide things for their family. But it's really given me a lot, because I've made some amazing connections and friendships in the industry and outside of my industry, and just been able to connect with people and that I would never have met in a million years had it not been for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And it's got to be pretty fulfilling to, help others see what, make those little tweaks and, see their businesses take off.
Oh yeah. It's been so fun. I've had a couple of women that were in that photography group I mentioned before that I sort of knew through different meetups we'd done and stuff. And then they would come in and do workshops or mentor sessions with me. And now one of them is actually in a kind of local mastermind group that we do. And I've watched her business go from just baseline zero, like she's just starting with no knowledge, to this super successful photography business where she's able to be full-time and provide for her family. And it's just been incredible to see the growth there. And that's one of the reasons why I like meeting with the people who are local to the Dallas area. Not that I don't want to reach other people too, but when you can kind of have that personal connection with them, and you run into them at places, or you can say, let's go have dinner and catch up, and you can get to know them a little more on a deeper level than just listening to them through a podcast or or that one-time meeting that you might have with a mentorship or something like that.
Yeah. And I like that you are, sharing your information specifically with other photographers. We talked before about how my wife used to do photography, and the mindset here in Salt Lake City is very the scarcity mindset. It's trying to, a lot of photographers would rather spend more time cutting the other person down rather than building up their business. And really it is abundant. There is enough work out there for many photographers in each area, but a lot of people see it as more of a threat. And so by you just volunteering that information, you're promoting that abundant mindset, which is really cool.
Yeah, I hope so, because I think we have that here too a little bit in the Dallas area, and especially people will come into the Facebook group, and the one I run we have about 1,700 members currently. And when people come into it, they're like, oh my gosh, 1,700 people in just this one area.
Right.
That's a lot. And I'm like, well, no, it's really not, because some of them are just hobbyists. Some of them are just taking pictures of their own kids. Some of them might be photographing newborns, and you shoot high school seniors. That's two totally different markets you're looking at, and I use this example all the time. There's about 4 other senior photographers nearby me, and I used to shoot high school seniors. And I said, I was doing a workshop one time and someone asked that question. They said, well, how do you not feel like that you're just another name on a list of photographers? I'm like, well, think about this. If you live in an area where, let's say there's 4 high schools near you, and each, just for round numbers, each high school has 1,000 seniors in their graduating class. And I was like, and let's say you only shoot senior girls. Let's say half of those are senior. You're still looking at 2,000 senior girls just in your area alone. There's no way you by yourself could even photograph that many if you tried. So if there's 5 of you in your area, even the 5 of you couldn't shoot all 2,000 of those in a year if you really want to. It's there. And once I explained it that way, she was like, "Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense." But sometimes we get so caught up in our own little bubble. And I think that's part of the hard part of being an entrepreneur is you spend a lot of time on your own.
Yep.
And you get very much in your head. And it's really easy to get kind of into that spiral of, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough because I'm looking at everybody else's work and it's amazing. Or there's so many other photographers. How can I compete? And sometimes you need to get out of your own head. You need to have a conversation with somebody else that kind of puts things in perspective. And so hopefully what I can do is either through the mentorship classes that I offer, workshops, and the podcast, I can be that voice that says, no, it's going to be okay. Like get out of your head, get out of your own way. You got this. You're not, it's not a matter of trying to scramble for the next client. There are more than enough clients out there for everybody that wants to do this.
Yeah. Like you said, I think my biggest enemy is my own brain. Like just thinking of overthinking things. And I definitely am my own worst enemy at times. So I completely understand that.
Yeah.
So you're going through this process. You've obviously had a fair amount of success in this, but what would you say has been your biggest failure in your venture on your own, and what have you learned from it?
Oh, I've had a lot of failures, a lot of little ones, a couple of big ones. I think my biggest failure has been thinking that things are going to happen faster than they do. I think I did this with my photography business. When I started out, I thought, I'm just going to create a website and create a Facebook page and just put it out there. And if I build it, they'll come. And I didn't do anything else to try to market myself or get myself out there. And I allowed that to frustrate me to the point where I was like, okay, should I really be doing this?
Yeah.
And then the same thing with when I started getting into the education side of things, I had built up this reputation in my photography business as being, successful and having kind of, I guess, clout in my area for being known as a certain photographer with weddings and boudoir and things like that. And being known in my area as like kind of a go-to resource. And so I thought, oh, well, with my education business, I can just create something and it's going to take off. Yeah. And I just had this idea for this membership site. I spent a couple of months creating it. I put a lot of energy into it. I put it out there and it just fell flat on its face because I took it personally at first. I thought, okay, well, clearly I'm not as great as I thought I was. Apparently I let, things go to my head. But once I stepped away from it and I allowed kind of the dust to settle from it and I, got around some of my other friends and we were talking about it and I was crying and I was upset and I was like, I have failed. And they said, it's not a failure. You just weren't focusing on the right thing. And I really started looking into it. And I think my biggest takeaway from it was I was creating what I thought people wanted instead of looking at what do the people want and then creating that. Yeah. And so I was looking more at like, well, what's going to benefit me and what would I want instead of asking people, well, what is it that's going to benefit you? How can I create something for you? And so now I've taken that lesson and moving forward, I'm looking at everything as, okay, even in my podcast, I'm like, okay, well, what topics do you want to hear about? Because I know what I want to talk about, but if what I want to talk about isn't what you want to hear, then it's not going to benefit either one of us. So I think that was my biggest takeaway from a couple of the little failures. And then of course the big product failure that I had was just stop worrying so much about what I think is right and give for what the clients want, create for what your target audience wants.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally understand that. And I get in that trap as well. It's like, okay, what do I want? And fortunately through things like, even things like Instagram stories, it's really easy to gauge things really quickly as you're testing things out, or you have a question on a product and it's like, okay, let's just throw it out there. People will give you their feedback. That's for sure. So
well, and I think it's hard too, and I don't know if this is just me, but like I can be kind of stubborn. And so once I put my mind to something, I'm like, no, but this is how I'm doing it because it's going to look really awesome and it's going to be really cool. But then I put it out there and it's hard at first to sometimes hear the feedback and realize that what you've created isn't exactly as great as you thought it was. But I've had to learn to sort of open myself up a little bit more and let go of the things that, I guess, not take things personally is a good way to put it. Like to separate myself from what I've created and say, okay, well, it's not that I've done something wrong. It's just that I need to make a few changes and I don't need to throw everything out just because one thing isn't working. I just need to figure out how to tweak it all. And so it's been a learning process. And I think you're right. Like we have such access to just asking people questions. I mean, we have social media and email lists and so many different ways to just instantly get feedback that we need to be doing that more often so that we know exactly what it is our audience wants.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've learned in creating this product, even just changing the way the name is presented, that made a difference to people and what they expected out of the product. And so it's just those little things, initially I did the same thing. I put something out there. It was still in a sample stage, but I put something out there and I didn't get the feedback I wanted to hear. And then, tweak it a little bit, just tweak how I present the product, and people suddenly fell in line and understood what I was trying to accomplish. So definitely understand where you're coming from on that. But I'm glad you're persevering and you're persistent and you are stubborn, which is good in a lot of ways, that you'll keep trying, even though it may not be exactly the way you envisioned it.
Yeah. Well, I think it helps, you were mentioning, I think at one point before, about the fact that people don't talk enough about their failures. We talk a lot about the success. And I was listening to a couple other podcasts, and one of them, I think it was the Jasmine Star, her new podcast. And she went through, there was a whole episode where she kind of talked about some of the things that she struggled with and some of the failures that she's had. And there was around that same time I listened, this is all back when this product launch kind of fell on its face. And I listened to another podcast where the same thing, like they were talking about the fact that we don't talk enough about the struggle. We talk a lot about the shiny end product. We don't talk about the behind the scenes of what all went into that. And that helped me get through that time where I was struggling with the idea that I had failed at something, to hear that other people who are now, I look at as being, well, they seem to have it all together. And I'm like, oh no, we all have those struggles. So I think that's a big thing. I think more people need to talk about the not so shiny side of running a business. That's not, it doesn't all come out perfectly in the wash. There's a lot of work and trial and error that goes into it. That's not so pretty.
Yeah. I think we're good at talking about how hard it is, but that to a lot of people could just be, okay, you have to put in a lot of hours to get that success. But really it's taking those failures, learning from them, building upon them, and then continuing on. That's what really makes it hard to be an entrepreneur. So I appreciate that you understand that. And, like I said, I think it was before we started recording, but yeah, we don't talk enough about the failures because people need to understand we all go through it.
Exactly. Yeah. I completely agree.
Yeah. So since this is the Hustle the Day podcast, how do you personally define the word hustle?
Oh, so for me, hustle is just about getting up every day and figuring out what the next step is. I think it's stepping outside your comfort zone is a big one for me personally. In the beginning of starting a business, I thought, oh, I just have to do X, Y, Z and it'll all fall into place. Because again, that's kind of what I thought I saw in other people doing. And it was that realization that no, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And I think, there's really no one way to define hustle, in my opinion. I think it's every day you get up and you look at what needs to be accomplished and you put in the work to get it done, and you get out of your comfort zone and you do things that you never thought you would do. And you market yourself and you talk about yourself and you make connections with people, and then the next day you get up and you do it all over again, and it looks different every single day, but you are constantly pushing yourself towards a goal. And then once you get to that goal, you're pushing yourself to the next goal and the next goal, and you're just always moving forward. So I think to me, the hustle is that continuous movement forward. Even if some days it's little baby steps and other days it's huge giant leaps, it's doing something every single day.
That's very cool. I appreciate that description, and I completely agree with you. It's moving things forward, even on the days you don't want to do it. That will definitely create some momentum. That's really awesome.
Or on the days when you feel like it should be moving faster than it is, and you're like, why am I not taking giant leaps? And why are they? But those little baby steps are still just as important as those big leaps too. It's just sometimes it's hard to see that.
Yeah. I love that you also mentioned getting out of your comfort zone. And I think that is a huge part of it, because that's where you grow. I mean, when you are out of your comfort zone, that's when you're really growing. And that's a great way to grow your business too, is to get out of that thing that's already working. A lot of people use the phrase, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But at the same time, if you just stay the status quo, eventually you get comfortable, and eventually you're going to get left behind. So getting uncomfortable is a good way to have that continue the growth.
Yeah, I agree.
And believe it or not, one thing I'm not very comfortable with is talking. So I'm
you're doing a great job.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm definitely getting out of my comfort zone and doing a podcast. But like you mentioned, it's something you felt comfortable with. It's your skill set isn't writing. Same with me. So it's great that you have that voice and you're out there using it and sharing your gift with others. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah. So I want to be aware of your time and not take too much of your time, but I want to ask you one more question is, what excites you about the future?
Oh, wow. It's a good question. A lot of things. I think for one, My youngest daughter I have about a year and a half left before she starts school. And so right now, personally, I'm excited about spending that time with her and focusing on the things that she and I can do together before she starts, that kindergarten and she's gone all day. And I'm trying to remind myself that things happen when they're supposed to happen, because I will get ideas and I get excited about something and then I get frustrated that I don't have the time to do it because she's with me all the time. And so I'm looking forward to slowing down a little bit and just kind of enjoying that time with her. And then in saying that, I'm also going to say I'm excited about the things coming up in my business, which, one of the things is taking this podcast and the idea that I had this sort of item, this product that I'd created that sort of was a flop. And I'm going to take in the feedback I've received, and I'm going to work on creating an online course that people will be able to hopefully purchase in the future. That's still sort of in the very early beginning stages, but it's taking a failure that I had and learning from it and repurposing it in a different way. So I'm excited to dive into that and just sort of see what happens there. But yeah, and then just connecting with people. I'm excited to see who I meet going forward through this podcast and other things that I've coming up with, local networking events that I'm creating, and always looking for new people and new opportunities that, being open to things that come my way that I maybe don't even see coming.
Yeah, that's awesome. You've got a lot of exciting things on the horizon, it sounds like.
Yeah, I'm excited.
One thing you mentioned, though, that I've had somebody else mention before is the slow down to speed up. They had a similar mindset. They needed to slow down and focus on family a little bit more. But when you're in those moments and you come back to work, you tend to have a little bit more clarity on what you need to speed up that business, rather than, halfway thinking about, your kid in front of you, halfway thinking about your business. You devote your mind to that situation that you're in. So when you get back to the business, you almost come back to it with new eyes. And so
that refreshed feeling is really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree that, slowing down can actually speed up your business as well. So I think you've got a good head on your shoulders right now for that aspect. But I'm excited to see where this all goes, and excited for your new course and, all the things that you're going to be doing with your business. But I want to give you some time to shout out anyone in particular, tell people where to find you and find out more information about you.
Yeah, thank you. So for my photography business, it's Paisley Lane Photography on all platforms. So I'm on Facebook and Instagram. And then with my podcast, it's called Girl Means Business, and it's on all the podcast platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play. And then same thing on Instagram, it's Girl Means Business. And so I do weekly episodes. I do interviews and solo episodes, all business marketing related, life related, mom related, anything kind of similar what we talked about today, as far as balancing that whole sort of life, business, mom world. And so we get into all of that.
Very cool. Yeah. And I'll make sure to include the links to those things in the description for the show as well. So you can just click on those and find out more about Kendra. But
thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for taking time out of your day. Like we talked about before, you've got family coming in and for the holidays. And so I appreciate that you were willing to take some time out of that to talk to me.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. This has been really fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So all those that were listening, I know I got value out of this, so I'm sure you got value out of this as well. And I encourage you to get out there and hustle the day. Thanks for listening to the Hustle the Day podcast all the way through. I really appreciate that. I just want to let you know that I help small businesses with their online strategy. So if you or anyone that you know needs help with their online strategy and owns a small business, I'm your guy. Go ahead and connect with me at Trent V Bray on Instagram or TrentVBray.com.